much does a memory weigh? How much does a memory weigh?
Welcome to Conjuncture. My name is Jordan Camp, and I'm really delighted to be here with Leyla McCalla. She is an award-winning musician and singer-songwriter. She was a member of the Grammy-winning Carolina Chocolate Drops and is a member of Our Native Daughters. She's also produced 4 solo albums, Vari-Colored Songs, a tribute to Langston Hughes, A Day for the Hunter, A Day for the Prey, Capitalist Blues, and most recently, Breaking the Thermometer. And thanks to our friends at the Louisiana Music Factory for the albums. I'm really excited to speak with her today here in New Orleans at Tulane University about her work on New Orleans, Haiti, and struggles for social justice. So thanks so much for taking the time to speak with me today, Layla. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. So happy to be here.
Well, so I wanted to start here in New Orleans since so much of your work is inspired by the city. It is a city full of contradictions. You know, one of the most unequal cities in the United States with one of the largest prison and jail populations, but also a place that has powerful Black musical traditions, including blues and jazz. In 2019, you released an album called the Capitalist Blues, and I hope to invite you to reflect on the intervention that that album is making about living under capitalism in New Orleans.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like, you know, one of the things that comes up for me immediately is that I kind of just felt like capitalism is the system that we all live in. And, you know, I was writing that song. I started writing that song and I had these lyrics for a long time. You keep telling me to climb this ladder, I've got to pay my dues. And I was thinking about my own life, you know, with music. And then I said, you know, but as I rise, the stakes get higher. And then for so long, it was just like, what's the lyric? I can't think of it. And then once Capitalist Blues popped in my head, I've got the Capitalist Blues, I was just like, oh my God, this is the perfect umbrella for all these other songs that I'm trying to like, you know, bring forth right now. And, you know, I think I was just at a time of like really reckoning with like, what is the goal here? You know, what is the goal here in, you know, not just as like a resident of this city of New Orleans, but in the world, like, you know, and I felt like, yeah, capitalism is just this thing that we are all constantly grappling with, whether we realize it or not. And, you know, just that old trope of like, there isn't any, you know, ethical consumption in a capitalist society, it really eats away at your soul. And so my songs were really about the emotional kind of response to that feeling of helplessness and, you know, being up against something that is so consuming and so much bigger than we are as individuals. And that feels very much in line with the things that I'm usually grappling with in my work. You know, Trump had just been elected, and I remember just that feeling of kind of malaise, you know, after that, and just so many oppressive, you know, authoritarian kind of playbook techniques coming to the fore, and people saying, well, oh my God, this is the United States. How could we be like this? And I remember thinking, well, we've been like this actually for 300 years. This is just chickens coming home to roost. And so it just felt like all these songs were about me processing that, but to see it from a New Orleans perspective, from the perspective of someone who's also grappling with the sort of historical and cultural connections between Haiti and New Orleans, I think, just for me, it felt like, oh, this is like the things that I'm meant to process in my work, my personal kind of journey in this creative process.
Yeah, I want to ask you, you moved to New Orleans from New York in the early 2010s, is that right?
In 2010.
Okay, so this, you're witnessing these conditions over almost a decade by the time you produce Capitalist Blues. And, in a way you could read that album as a kind of homage to the musical traditions in the city. I think of the metaphor from the song, Money is King, and the poetic imagery in that. I wonder if you could reflect on that, on the metaphor and imagery in the album.
Absolutely. Money is King is a calypso tune from Trinidad, from an artist who called himself the Growling Tiger. And I think there's just like a lot of metaphor and playfulness in a lot of different Caribbean traditions where people have found expression and a safe space for their expression of political ideas or social commentary in these songs that are very playful and, but very reflective of the things that moment is bringing forth or that society is grappling with. And, so the song Money is King, I learned it years ago from a compilation, a calypso compilation that was like the Growling Tigers, like best of hits. And I always thought, oh, I want to sing that song. And I didn't know, it says if a man has money today, people don't care if he has Cocoa Bay. And I was like, what is Cocoa Bay? And, when I sing that song, Caribbean people laugh because it's like completely not, PC or like, it's probably offensive by any measure of today's standards. But I guess Cocoa Bay is like leprosy, but it's just like, the idea that people are so shallow that if you present as someone who has money, who has access, who has wealth, you can just get away with a lot more. And that's true worldwide, that isn't like just in Trinidad. It's like everywhere. And, I find a lot of that, it's interesting because I really fell in love with a particular style of music from Haiti called troubadour music, troubadour. And a lot of it is like I always liken it to like Haitian hillbilly music. It's music from the countryside. It is not high art, it is songs that people write about what's happening in their lives, what's happening in society. I feel like I find that a lot in Louisiana Creole and Cajun music. And so I started to see some similarities in just like what people are grappling with and what comes out in the songs. There's like so many Cajun songs that are like, oh, my heart is so broken, all I can do is drink, I'm going to jail for the rest of my life, like, and the other songs from Haiti are, oh, my mother sent me to weigh the coffee and I got arrested and what am I going to say to my mother, and it's like talking about the state, like, state violence and, detention by state authorities. And these make their way, these like, lyrics make their way into these songs that are like super playful and danceable and everyone's laughing and having a good time. And I'm like, that is like the beauty and tragedy and, the thing that's that tension that I'm looking for all the time actually in songs. Like I want my heart to be broken and opened at the same time. And like what more fertile ground to do that than these old songs that have these old lessons that we are always going to have to be learning.
It's such dramatic imagery. I mean, I think you say after the Cocoa Bay that, you could kill someone and get away with it, but if you're poor, it's a dog is better than you. Am I
Yeah.
remembering that
Oh,
correctly?
yeah. I mean, how many memes are there out in the world today about people, you know, just like treating their dogs so much better than they treat, you know, their fellow human beings.
Yeah. Well, you know, you say this about the Caribbean. I mean, in a way, New Orleans can be thought as a southern port city or the northernmost Caribbean city in a different way. And there's so much of a kind of blues geography, to use Clyde Wood's term, in your music. There's a relationship between New Orleans, Haiti, as you mentioned before, and I hope we'll talk more fully about, songs about Aleppo, and then the relationship between these places. And I wanted to ask you if you might reflect on the role of region and place in the music that you make.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, I think that for me, it's been such an interesting journey of like mapping out where all this music originated or evolved, or how it's evolving, just kind of from an as an observer. But for me, it is also just very tied to my connection with being a Pan-Africanist. You know, I see all of these traditions as extensions of African traditions. I lived in West Africa when I was in high school, lived in Accra in Ghana. And, you know, we have a lot of West African culture and Haitian culture. It's very, you know, we have that really all over South America, Central America, the Caribbean, and, you know, in African American communities in the United States. And so I'm always curious about that, you know, like I just am like, wow, like the fact that people were hiding okra seeds in their hair, and that's how okra made its way over, you know, to the United States. Think about how many things like that were cultural, that weren't like, you know, the things that you could hold. The banjo, you know, I never knew that I was going to be a banjo player and be on this journey of like mapping out, you know, how the banjo has influenced all these different music styles and how it made its way over to the New World during the transatlantic slave trade. But I find myself, you know, the banjo is a metaphor for like all of this culture that has been kind of appropriated and then reappropriated, and like, you know, what does that mean? What does that mean about authenticity? What does that mean about, you know, where things come from? It gets really muddy, you know, you can no longer say, well, this is, you know, only belongs to these people and this only belongs to these people. And I think that that's kind of the thing about, that's interesting about place and about exploring this music, is that the lines just get blurrier and blurrier the deeper you go into it, because, and it's like, well, what is the Taino influence in this music? What is the, you know, indigenous influence? We don't give credit to that enough, you know, and we know that in, not just in Haiti, but in Louisiana, that marooned enslaved people were collaborating with indigenous populations and learning how to, you know, navigate the marsh and learning how to navigate the countryside, and learning this indigenous knowledge that has so informed so much of our understanding of the actual land that we live on, that has been like cut out of the conversation. Like, you know, it isn't like white people came and they were like, we know everything about what's going on here, you know? It's like, we have, it's always been a collaboration. It's always been a collaboration all over the world. And, you know, that isn't without a lot of conflict and iniquity, but I think that once you start to kind of understand that, the music part of it is even more interesting, because music is that place where people really release a lot of their, you know, a lot of their emotional baggage, you know, all the things that we carry, a lot of that is stored in music and song.
Yeah, and I hope to come back to your work with the banjo and recovering those traditions, particularly with our Native daughters. And I wanted to say, you know, the Black and Native traditions of course, honored by the Mardi Gras Indian tradition here in the city. And, you know, the connection that you make between New Orleans and Haiti, I heard you say once that you came to Haitian music through the music of New Orleans, if I remember correctly. Having grown up Asian American, your family from Haiti, you grew up in New York. And so maybe I could transition to ask you about this latest work, Breaking the Thermometer, about Radio Haiti, an archive that's housed at Duke University. It was a commission and it was a collaborative project, multimedia. You did the music, there's also theater production. My understanding is it was released in March 2020, a difficult time to say the least.
Oh, yeah.
But I wanted to ask if you could talk about how you came to that project and if you could explain the meaning of Breaking the Thermometer as a title.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, I had, I guess, when Duke University approached me about this potential commission work, I had 2 albums under my belt. It was actually, I was touring Day for the Hunter, Day for the Prey, and I did a concert at the Sarah P. Duke Gardens, which is this beautiful garden where they host, you know, outdoor concerts and a lot of community comes out. And it was just, I remember it just being like, this is really nice, you know? And, I got approached by Aaron Greenwald, who was then the director at Duke Performances, and made a dear friend in historian Laurent Dubois around that time, who has done extensive research on Haiti and Haitian history. And they said, would you be interested in doing like a commissioned piece? And that was really the first time that someone had approached me about doing something that was a multimedia project and, you know, commissioned to work with an archival collection. They were doing these collaborations between Duke Performances and the archives of the Rubenstein Library there. And they asked me, you know, we've recently acquired this archive of this radio station, Radio Haiti. And I was like, that sounds familiar. Which, you know, I'll explain later. But would you be interested in possibly like doing a theater work? And I was like, and they're like multimedia. And I was always interested in doing experimental projects like that and, you know, having collaborative spaces that were not just about music. I think I was in a particularly ripe moment to work on something completely new. And I was just like, you know, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. Yes, all in. I am down to do this. And basically, Radio Haiti was a radio station that was owned by a man named Jean-Dominique from 1970 until his assassination in the year 2000. And so there's like 5,000 hours of tape that survived, you know, some of the most brutal conditions of any dictatorship in the world. You know, many attacks on Radio Haiti's journalists and independent press in general. I think during that time, that era is that I'm referring to as the Duvalier era. My own parents emigrated to the United States during this time in the 60s. And I started to take trips to Duke to work with the archivist, Laura Wagner, who guided me through the archive. And it was just like, this is so much information. How is this ever going to become art? You know, that was that's the big challenge. That's the river that you have to cross. And a couple of things that were super amazing and helpful to me were that Laura had created a timeline of Haitian history and a timeline of Radio Haiti's sort of genesis in history. I watched a film by Jonathan Demme called The Agronomist that was all about the life of Jean Dominique. I was in touch with his widow, Michelle Montas, who is, a ginormous journalist in her own right, and co-directed the radio station with him. And so she is sort of the surviving inheritor of this archive and, my connection to this legacy. In my research, I came across a lot of recordings of Jean-Dominique. He wrote some incredible editorials where he's talking about, he would just write these really incisive, poetic editorials that were broadcast. And he was kind of known for being incisive and poetic and very steadfast in his convictions about the role of independent press, about what was happening to his people and getting the word out about that. And so he always said, he was talking about the Duvalier regime. They're breaking the thermometer to hide the fever, and that the thermometer, that the independent press is the people's thermometer. And the idea is that you can break the thermometer, but it doesn't, make the fever go away. And I am always attracted to these phrases that can be applied to so many different situations. And so once we kind of, heard that quote, I was like, is breaking the thermometer to hide the fever too long of a title? And apparently it's not. You can do whatever you want in this world. And so that became the title. We did a lot of, it was an intensive process, a years-long intensive process of doing sort of intensive artist residencies and really kind of getting to the heart of what this story is about and really what I wanted to say about it. And one thing that came up, I collaborated with theater maker, director Kyoko McCrae on the piece, and one thing that kept on coming up was my own memories and my own kind of relationship to this radio station and to this history. My father's organization, the National Coalition for Haitian Rights, did a screening of The Agronomist shortly after Jean-Dominique was assassinated. And I met Michelle Montas when I was 15 years old. And so I had all, those kinds of memories flooding back to me, like, oh yeah, all those people. I was putting all of that together. At the same time that the Radio Haiti archive was being transferred to Duke, my father's archive of the National Coalition for Haitian Rights was also being transferred to the library. And so there were even pictures of me at protests as a child, like in this archive that I was finding, not at the Radio Haiti archive, but at the Human Rights Archive at Duke. And so I thought, well, that's interesting. Like this, it's just very synchronistic and very serendipitous and just one of those things where you're like, I am on the right path, Your
father's papers are at Duke.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And so there's that. And then on top of that, I was just kind of doing all this research and realizing that I understood half of what was going on in the archive. I could pick out words, but not always meaning. And I felt this disconnect between, what I was being asked to do and what I was capable of actually understanding. And I have to really credit Laura Wagner, the archivist, for guiding me through that process, because I could pick out a word, a few words, but I didn't always know what it meant altogether. And I think it really helped my Creole understanding to do all this research, but also it made me realize how much I didn't know, but how much this is a part of what I need to be doing, because I care about it. I want to know. I care about the Creole language. I care about Haitian people. I care about Haitian history. I feel like Haiti is one of the most disparaged, misunderstood countries on this planet. And my emotional connection to it, my ancestral connection to it is so precious and important to me and is my main motivation. So I had a lot of memories. I had spent a summer with my grandmother Jacqueline Bryant when I was 10 years old, and I had a lot of memories of, just nostalgia about Haiti. And I felt like, if I'm going to make a piece about Haiti and about Radio Haiti, like one of the most important things for me was for people to come away and feel like, wow, this place is so beautiful and I want to know more about it. And that's pretty much been my goal with all of my incorporating Haiti into my projects. And, is that there are so many beautiful things in this world that people should want to know more about, and so Haiti is like my connection, but just kind of fostering that curiosity and that curiosity in myself about things that I don't understand. So, as you can see, Breaking the Thermometer has been quite the spirit quest. And so in addition to the timelines that Laura had put together about Radio Haiti's history and Haitian history, there's the timeline of my life. And I realized that, I was born right before the fall of the Duvalier regime. And I was born right in this time where there was like a lot of hope about democracy and, inclusion of the masses of Haitian people in the political process in Haiti. Aristide was elected, and then he was taken out by the CIA. I later found out that my grandfather was, his ambassador at large at the time. And so there's just a lot of personal connection, I think, to this material. That it's interesting because it's like you write a song in one era of your life, and then you look back on it 10 years later, and you're like, wow, that's what that song was about, and that's how it connects to the things that I understand about my life now. And so Breaking the Thermometer has very, very much been like that for me. The more I learn about this history, the more I learn about my connection to it. And it's a very, just an incredibly important history and such an interesting story.
So, you draw on an extraordinary range of sources. There's the archive itself. There are oral interviews with your family members, and then a series of personal reflections that you intermix in the original compositions that make up the album. I wonder if you could reflect on the form and the choice to present that story, which manages to be simultaneously a story about the U.S. and Haiti, Radio Haiti, and then a story about Leyla McCalla.
I did not realize it was going to be a story about Leyla McCalla, I'll tell you that much. I mentioned my collaborator, director, Kyoko McRae.
Who lives here in the city, right?
Who lives here in New Orleans, but not for long. She's moving up to New York.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, good for us.
Yeah.
Right.
That'd be good for you guys. I had so many things that were coming up for me, and I think Kyoko, as a theater maker, was like, we have to, there's all this information about this radio station that we're sifting through, but how do we get people to care? How do we get people's hearts involved in this, and invested in this story? And she was like, we're going to do it through you, Layla. And I was like, what? Besides me just like writing these songs and arranging these songs? And she's like, yes, because I would have a lot of memories coming up, just like the sound of traffic or the sound of, I remember hearing gunshots in the night when I was 10 years old and being scared. And I remember seeing goats, and, my grandmother bought us a pig, and we just had all these, very, very nostalgic memories of Haiti that really connected me to Haiti. My grandmother was very, very invested in us loving Haiti. So she went to the market. She got 2 of every animal that she could find. We had like 2 hamsters, 2 rabbits, 2 guinea pigs. We got a pig. We got a goat. We got a dog. Like, it was just like, this is how you entertain kids, just get them a bunch of animals and show them how to take care of them. And I remember like just the smell of the coffee in the morning, the sound of the morning. And so that kind of stuff was like, very emotional for me. And my grandmother was just this very unorthodox, she was a light-skinned, you know, kind of from a kind of bourgeois, you know, semi-bourgeois Haitian family. But she rejected all of that, and she was like, you know, embraced the voodoo spirituality. She was an educator. She had taught in St. Thomas for years, and when she moved back to Haiti, she wanted to start her own school. And so she had all these people in her community that she was introducing me to. And I remember I was saying I wanted to be a journalist because she was like, you should interview these kids. So we'd go on these walks. And I remember I had this notebook and I was interviewing these kids about what their lives were like in Haiti, because she was just like, you guys are spoiled American brats and you need to know that about yourselves, you know. And she was just very, you know, she had an amazing personality, and she was very like take no prisoners about that kind of stuff. And I just appreciate that so much now, because that was my connection to Haiti. That was my connection to understanding my Americanness and my Haitianness at the same time. I remember I didn't want to leave at that time. And the more I talked about that experience, the more Kyoko was like, this is really interesting and we should incorporate it into the theater work. And I was like, oh, but how are we going to do that? And so we, you know, part of the experience of the theatrical work was the sound design, was incorporating all of the sounds of the archive, but then there were other sounds that we wanted to incorporate, you know, US news broadcasts about Haiti, and about things that were happening in Haiti. You know, my own interviews with I interviewed my mother and my father. The interview with my mother made it in some creative writing that I did, reflecting on that summer with my grandmother. And I remember there's one particular interview with my mother where, you know, part of the thing about memory is that it's not accurate and it's not linear. And so, especially old memories of like your childhood. And so I was interviewing my mother, asking her, why were we in Haiti during that time? And, you know, I remembered, well, I didn't remember. She told me that she was in law school and she was working on election monitoring. She was an intern at some legal firm that was working on election monitoring in Haiti, you know, for the second coming of Aristide. What an interesting time. And so that's why we were staying with my grandmother. And so, you know, I had this whole conversation with my mother about why, you know, what that was like for her and what my experience was like to her. And my mother also recalls that was a very definitive time for me, kind of like understanding that I am Haitian, because I had that experience. And so that ended up making its way into the piece, and that ended up making its way onto the album. And, you know, it's interesting talking about it now, because there's so much stuff that didn't make its way into anything that I need to listen back to those interviews, especially the one with my father, because my father's, you know, kind of path into human rights and activism was also very nonlinear and very much not what was expected of him. And so it's just very, I find it all very inspiring now and interesting. And, you know, it's kind of like just so classic. Like you think, oh, I just care about other people and I just care about social justice. And then I'm like, oh my God, this is like literally in my blood. You know, it doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from my family.
Well, I wanted to ask you about this. Your grandfather, who you've mentioned, Benjamin Dupuy, he recently passed in April. And so first I wanted to send my condolences to you and to your family for the loss, but also ask you to reflect a bit about, you know, his influence. You had said when he passed that, and I'm quoting you from Facebook, he had a deep love for Haiti, and the intensive discussions and critiques of class politics helped shape me and will stay with me for the rest of my days. And so, you know, and I know you've said both your parents long-term activists in New York City. So Yeah, do you think, was that a conscious thing in making the album, that you saw yourself as a continuation of the tradition of your family, or was it something else?
No, no, I really didn't see it as a continuation of any tradition, partially because my family, no one was like an artist, you know? And so in that way, I feel very in uncharted waters. Not that I'm the first person to make, activist kind of inspired work, but, my family, I thought of them as like intellectuals, who were, art supporters for sure. I remember when we visit Haiti when I was a kid, my parents were at the Olafson Hotel every Thursday night listening to Ram, who's also another band who lives like 2 blocks away from my home now. So it's funny how history kind of repeats and recycles. But my grandfather my entire life was not a very close figure. It's not like we were having family dinner every Saturday and having these debates. But I remember when I graduated from college, I would see my grandfather throughout my life, and he was always happy to see me. And, he was always doing very important things. That's what I remember. He was doing very important things, and he was very invested in Haitian things. And I knew that they were political, and I knew that it was very important to him, It wasn't until I was older, my grandfather took me out to dinner. I remember when I graduated from college, and he said, now it's time for us to talk about some serious things in this world that you need to understand. And it was all, a lot of it was about class struggle and class inequality. And at the time I was kind of like, okay, all right, I get it. But now I'm like looking back like, oh my gosh, like those are the things that I want to ask him about now and that I don't have access to. So it's so classic. It's like when someone passes, that's when you really start to learn more about them. And, something that I have come to understand is that my mother's upbringing when she was with my grandfather, because my grandparents had divorced, she was part of a political experiment. Their house was a political experiment. I'm at my grandfather's funeral learning about how all of his kids knew Morse code. He was Marxist. He was not judicious in his political convictions. He was very, very married to his political convictions. And everyone that was in that house was part of the movement, and it was about liberation for the Haitian people. It was about how to restructure this stratified society. My grandfather is a controversial figure because he was very outspoken and very, just would not negotiate with people who were not interested in fully understanding his analysis and his perspective. And actually, I went to see him last May because he says, you're making this piece, Breaking the Thermometer, which would have been deeply upsetting to him. He thought human rights was total bullshit. And he thought that, that was just like another way of reinforcing class reinforcing class in general, is to create this thing about human rights that people didn't really understand. The real thing was restructuring the class system. It isn't about just aid and helping people. And in fact, there's an argument to be made that aid has greatly stifled progress in Haiti and around the world. And, philanthropy is controversial because of that, because it reinforces this kind of power dynamic. So I've come to understand that. I don't think I understood that even a couple of years ago, but I remember him saying, so you're making this piece about Jean-Dominique. I said, Papi Ben, how did you feel about Jean-Dominique? Ugh, my arch enemy, and he's going on and on because my grandfather had been working His childhood best friend was Herbie Woodmeyer, who was the supposed inheritor of Radio Haiti. And my grandfather felt that that was stolen from him and that Jean-Dominique took over. So he was staunchly against a lot of the promotion of democracy, because he felt that democracy was not really the way to freedom. And he was really deeply committed to the idea of restructuring class in Haiti as the way to liberation. And so I wish I could pick his brain more about that now, but I did make a recording of him the last time, one of the last times I visit him in Miami. Actually, we were presenting Breaking the Thermometer in Miami, and I went to go visit him, and I interviewed him, and I recorded the interview, and he said a lot of things that I think I'll just think about forever, and that's, what more can we ask for, besides our elders to give us things to really think about and process. So, the more I learn about my grandfather, and I'm learning a lot more about him after his death than I did during his life, the more I realize what an interesting person he was, and, what his contribution, I think, really is to all of this history.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, I will say I also see you as an intellectual intervening in debates, and Breaking the Thermometer, also a historical work that like any historian, draws on extensive archives to make an argument about the past, but also political intervention in the present. I think of the song about the French-built colonial prison, Fort Demange, which was used by the Duvalier regime to torture, confine, assassinate opponents of the regime, journalists, intellectuals, organizers of all stripes. And throughout the album, there's a reflection on the memories of this state violence. A memory song, for example, you ask the audiences to consider the weight of those memories in the present. And for me, at least, as a listener, it took on a new meaning, in the aftermath of 2020, the mass protests sparked by the murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and countless others. So can you talk about the intervention you're making about memories of violence?
Yeah, it's interesting, because to me it's memories of anything, not just violence. But I think that our kind of culture is shifting into this conversation about, how trauma gets stored in our bodies, how it moves through generations, the idea that I was an unfertilized egg in my grandmother's body, and that I lived through some of the things that she lived through. I mean, these are like really new age kind of ideas, but also scientific and interesting to think about. And so I think I wrote this song thinking about, how the weight of our memories. And I remember I would always make these notes when we were writing, and then I'd read back the notes. This is still a big part of my creative process, is reading back the notes and being like, oh, that's a lyric, and at some point I wrote, how much does a memory weigh? And I came back to that idea, and I was like, that's the song. That's the whole theme of the song, is like thinking about that, and also facing my own kind of feeling of like, whoa, this is a lot to be wading through. This is a lot to be trying to say something about. I don't always know what the conclusion is, but I know that it's living inside of me, and I know that it's a part of me, and I know that this moment is me trying to release some of that weight. And I think that's what that song is about. It's about our collective connections, to our ancestry and to our experiences, and like kind of the bridge between those. And that's the bridge that we walk every single day in this world.
That's a powerful metaphor. I wonder if you'd be willing to perform one of the songs from the album.
Sure. I'm going to play the memory song. All right. How much does a memory weigh? How much does a memory weigh? What's the price our bodies will pay? What's the price our bodies will pay? How does this on earth not feel like a burden as it gets harder? I can't find the words. How much does a memory weigh? How much does a memory weigh? What's the price our bodies will pay? What's the price our bodies will pay? How does this honor not feel like a burden as it gets harder? I can't find the words. Light as a feather, heavy as boulders. As it gets harder, we're getting older.
Amazing. Well, that's a showstopper. I can't believe that I'll try to follow up with another question. But I would be remiss if I didn't say, Breaking the Thermometer is not your first collaborative project. You had done this amazing album, Songs of Our Native Daughters, that was recorded here in Louisiana and was released by the legendary Smithsonian Folkways. And you did that with Rhiannon Giddens, Amethyst Kia, and Allison Russell. And that album does a lot of work recovering Black banjo traditions. It's also a critique of racism, of capitalism, of misogyny. I wonder if you could talk about how those collaborative projects shape your ongoing work to intervene about history, music, and politics.
Yeah. I mean, you know, it's funny because when I was in the Carolina Chocolate Drops, Rhiannon Giddens, my good friend and collaborator on this project, was really getting into minstrel banjo tunes and learning about minstrelsy and incorporating that into sort of like the educational components of our work as the Carolina Chocolate Drops. And she had just gotten a banjo that was like a reproduction of a banjo from the 1840s, and was like, yeah, this is like the thing, you know. And it was just, it was like cool. Fretless banjo, not a gourd banjo, but a minstrel banjo. And you know, they originally, you know, all string instruments originally had gut strings, but this was like the updated version from the gourd banjo, which was just like literally a hollowed out gourd. And she was like studying all these books where people had notated what the tunes were and learning the tunes. And she's like, I want to do something with this, you know, and I don't exactly know what it's going to become. So fast forward years later, she's like, Smithsonian Folkways is inviting me to produce a record. I want you to be a part of it. I've invited Allison Russell. She invited Kaya Cater. She invited Amethyst Kia. Kaya didn't make it onto the record, sadly. But we basically were in this sort of generative process, figuring out what the songs were, figuring out what we were going to be talking about. And so, you know, it's just always so much part of the creative process. Like, we're going to make this album, and it's going to be about minstrel banjo music. And then, of course, we're like 4 Black women in a room with a banjo, with 4 banjos. We're like, there's a lot we could talk about here. And that's kind of, I think, what the album derives its potency from, is from the things that we needed to talk about and the things that we needed to process in that moment. And so we didn't know that we were becoming a band. We didn't know that we were going to make this record that, you know, all these people are going to listen to. It was just like this thing that Rhiannon was producing. We ended up convening, you know, in Breaux Bridge, Louisiana, Dirk Powell's studio. He co-produced the record alongside Rhiannon. And I remember showing up to the studio, and it was like, well, what song ideas do you have? And I was like, well, I've been kind of messing around with this, and I've been kind of messing around with that, and that's what I got. And so I was like, great, let's just like make up a song now. So that was kind of the process. I remember staying up really late at night with my friend Allison Russell, and we wrote the song "I Knew I Could Fly." And that was really inspired by Etta Baker, Piedmont blues guitarist. I had gotten really into Piedmont blues guitar playing because my first manager was a man named Tim Duffy, who runs the Music Maker Relief Foundation in Hillsborough, North Carolina. And I learned a lot about Piedmont blues and blues artists from that region, and kind of even mapping out what the blues was. You know, growing up in New Jersey, no one's like, yeah, this is Piedmont blues, and this is like Chicago blues, and this is like Memphis thing, you know? And so I remember learning about that, and I sat down with this, I fell in love with this record by Etta Baker, Railroad Bill. And I was just like, I'm gonna learn how to play melodies and play a bass line at the same time on the guitar. And that was, you know, became a part of my guitar playing and my finger picking style. But anyway, you know, the album, I think, was really about a lot of things that were kind of emerging in the moment, you know, and things that we are facing as individuals, things that we found a lot of comfort in facing together. And to bring that, to a public sphere, I don't think any of us fully saw the impact that that would have on people. But people love that record. People come up to me all the time like, our native daughters. We have played a total of 7 shows. And 2 of them were one of them was at the Newport Folk Festival. And one of them was at Carnegie Hall, sold out at Carnegie Hall. We just had no idea that we were going to strike such a chord in, just in the timing and in the imaginations of so many people. And it just goes to show how much, particularly in the United States, but really worldwide, people of all colors want to process this stuff. They want to understand how to be on the right side of history. And I think that's really what it's about. And it's good for it's good for me because it really reminds me, okay, this is what I'm about too, and that's the conversation that I want us to be having.
Well, thank you for the invitation to this conversation and for the work. And also, thank you for joining us for this episode of Conjuncture. It's been really lovely to speak with you, Layla.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening to everything I have to say.
A true pleasure, anytime. And thanks to all our viewers and listeners for joining us for this episode of Conjuncture. Stay tuned.